You were told that the desert forgets, that the wind erases everything, footsteps, bones, cities, even memory. But there are places where wind is not erasure. It is a keeper, a slow, patient archivist writing in reverse. In the Nubian desert, where the sand hums at twilight and stars bleed closer to the ground, a drone surveying for copper anomalies caught the shadow of a triangle that refused the sun, a perfect geometry etched into the dunes, a hollow that should have never survived the ages. The mission log dated the anomaly. No structure this deep, no formation this exact. And yet the sand measured its angles precisely, 51 degrees, 50 minutes, the same inclination as Giza's Great Pyramid. The desert laughed in silence, for beneath those shifting hills lay stone older than memory, older than maps, older than the first word for God. You must imagine the first descent. The archaeologists moved as if trespassing through time itself, each shovel of sand exhaling air that hadn't met the surface for 20,000 years. When the lidstone broke, the ground moaned, not like rock, but like something once alive, remembering breath. Inside, the temperature dropped by 9 degrees. Sand became dust. Dust became glitter. And there, half buried beneath calcite and silence, was a single-stepped pyramid, smaller than Giza but impossibly preserved, as though the wind had been instructed to protect it. It faced neither true north nor the Nile. It faced Orion. The first chamber was bare. No hieroglyphs, no offerings, only lines burned into basalt, curves too precise to be human, circles aligned with the speed of light. Their instruments failed to read depth. Magnetic flux rippled like heartbeat static. One researcher placed his palm on the wall. A hum followed, low, pulsing, deliberate. The sensors caught the pattern, 11.9 seconds. That same rhythm you once heard beneath ice, beneath cathedrals, beneath prayer. They logged it as resonant interference, but one of them, a linguist from Alexandria, whispered, "It's not interference, it's invitation." On the seventh day, when light struck the upper shaft, something answered. The sand above shimmered as if refusing to let go, and within that light faint engravings appeared, not written but grown into the stone. Patterns that resembled DNA strands, constellations, and something that should not have been there, a cross pate carved in relief beside the belt of Orion, the same sigil later used by the Knights Templar 6,000 years before they were born. No explanation passed the camp, only silence, that sacred currency of disbelief. They spoke in fragments. It's a hoax, anomaly, impossible, words made to mask wonder. But the desert was listening. Night fell as if poured, generators flickered, screens blinked into static. One by one, the lights dimmed, until only the pyramid glowed faintly from within, a pulse slow and deliberate, matching the hum. The linguist woke first. He said he had dreamed of sand folding inward, like paper memorizing itself. He said the pyramid was not built, it was remembered. And he said something else just before dawn. The stars are trying to return home. By morning, one of the drones had vanished from the log. Satellite feeds glitched, showing fragments of the dig flickering between frames of nothing. The coordinates disappeared from the digital atlas, replaced by a system error. And for the first time since the Bronze Age, the desert reclaimed its own. Only the team remained, standing before an opening that led downward into geometry that defied gravity. The air below shimmered faintly with heat and whisper. The hum deepened. The lead archaeologist wrote in her notebook, a habit from another century. This place was not waiting to be found. It was waiting to remember. She closed the cover, sealing her words inside. Above her the sun rose, ancient and new in the same breath, and the dunes rearranged themselves as if to hide what she had written. You were told the desert forgets, but the desert remembers everything. When the second chamber was opened, the sound came first. Not from the earth, not from their tools, but from the air itself, as though the atmosphere had been holding its breath for millennia and had finally exhaled. It was a low resonance, a vibration that didn't pass through the ears but through the bones, a sound that seemed to speak the language of matter itself. The archaeologists stood still, afraid to move. They called it a pressure anomaly, but it felt more like presence. Their cameras picked up a faint shimmer that moved along the walls, like reflections of water though there was none. The sand around the entrance pulsed in rhythm with the vibration, tiny dunes rising and collapsing, whispering in a frequency almost human. "You have never heard silence so loud." They lowered the lights to capture the engravings beneath the surface dust, and for a moment the entire chamber appeared alive, as if the walls themselves were remembering the moment of their creation. The markings were not carved but crystallized, forming a pattern that echoed both logic and chaos, like a thought suspended in stone. It was the linguist who noticed the symmetry. He ran his hand across the surface and whispered, "This is not writing, it's recording." The team gathered as he projected the pattern onto the tablet, translating the lines into digital code. What emerged was a lattice of numbers corresponding to star positions, but not the current sky. It was a map of Orion as it appeared 20,000 years ago. The coordinates matched the structure's alignment exactly. The pyramid wasn't built to honor the heavens, it was built to remember where they came from. One of the geophysicists, pale from lack of sleep, muttered that the readings made no sense, that the inner chamber emitted radiation consistent with non-ionizing energy similar to quantum resonance. The linguist smiled, not with pride, but with awe. "They used the planet's pulse as language," he said. "They didn't build monuments, they tuned them." And then the hum returned. Only this time it carried modulation, tones rising and falling as if responding to their voices. One by one, their devices turned on without touch. Screens displayed shifting shapes, geometric spirals forming into letters of no known alphabet. The linguist filmed it with trembling hands, whispering to the camera, "This is not an echo, it's conversation." The lights flickered. The generators failed. For a few seconds there was only darkness, the sound of breathing, and the rhythm beneath their feet. Then, as if guided by unseen command, their headlamps reignited, revealing something that hadn't been there before. A single phrase etched in the dust along the floor, written in ancient Greek and faint blue phosphorescence. It read, "We return through memory." The message faded as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind the faint smell of ozone and iron. The team argued over the footage, some claiming hallucination, others calling it electromagnetic discharge. But one woman, the lead archaeologist, stayed quiet. She remembered the hum in her bones and how it matched her heartbeat exactly. She knew the Earth was trying to tell its story through vibration, and she wondered whether humanity had ever truly listened. That night, as wind poured through the dunes, the sound shifted again. It was softer now, melodic, almost mournful. The desert seemed to hum in harmony with the pyramid below, as if both were part of one long forgotten symphony. The linguist couldn't sleep. He recorded hours of the resonance, playing it back at different speeds, until voices began to form, layers of tones weaving into syllables too perfect to be coincidence. He translated what he could, not into words, but into meaning. "They are not gone," he said quietly into the recorder. "They are waiting." At dawn, he found new symbols drawn in the dust around the excavation camp, curved like the orbits of planets intersecting. None of the team had made them. There were no footprints nearby, only wind. When he traced one of the curves with his finger, the hum rose again from beneath the ground, a single tone that filled the air like breath before speech. And somewhere below in the dark chambers of forgotten time, something old was listening back. They said architecture was the memory of mathematics, that every stone laid by human hands echoed an ancient equation. But what they found beneath the desert could not have been drawn from human memory. It was as if geometry itself had dreamt, and the dream had taken form in stone. The excavation continued cautiously after the second chamber, the hum now constant, but almost imperceptible, like a background frequency only the bones could hear. The air had a density no instrument could measure. When the team finally breached the third chamber, the scanners failed to read the space. The LiDAR beams refracted inward, folding back upon themselves, creating maps that twisted into infinity. The computer rendered the chamber as a sphere within a cube within a spiral, an impossible architecture that defied Euclidean sense. Yet to the naked eye it looked calm, harmonious, like the interior of a cathedral built for gods of logic rather than faith. The walls were not stone in any ordinary sense. They were composed of an unknown composite, crystalline and metallic, reflecting faint hues of violet and gold when touched by light. Patterns ran across the surfaces, not carved but aligned, like veins of energy conducting through a living organism. The physicist, Dr. Rahman, placed a hand on the surface and muttered that the material was resonating at exactly 432 hertz, the frequency ancient cultures associated with cosmic harmony. No known building material could maintain that resonance without an active power source. Yet here it was, vibrating softly, like the steady breath of a sleeper. They mapped the chamber's proportions. The base ratio measured 1 to 1.618, the golden mean. The diagonal intersected at 33 degrees from the floor, aligning precisely with the celestial equator as it would have appeared 20 millennia ago. Every line, every angle, every orientation obeyed a logic older than language. Dr. Falk, the mission director, stared at the readings and whispered, "This geometry is recursive. It's aware of itself." The statement drew nervous laughter, but no one disagreed. As they recorded, the instruments began to pick up electromagnetic pulses, synchronized with the Schumann resonance of Earth. The pyramid was not just aligned with the planet, it was communicating with it. The realization came slowly, like dawn through fog. Each measurement uncovered another impossible symmetry. The chamber's dimensions mirrored the orbital ratio between Earth and Venus. Its ceiling curvature matched the acoustic resonance of a perfect F-sharp. Even the placement of each stone seemed deliberate, atomic precision in a structure built before the known existence of the wheel. The linguist compared the angular frequencies of the hum to phonetic wavelengths. The results were absurd. The pattern translated into sound intervals identical to the tonal structure of Gregorian chant, a system of harmonics connecting physics to prayer. The archaeologists had unearthed not a monument, but a machine, one designed to interact with the planet's magnetic field through resonance. They tested the materials. The alloy contained silicon, calcium, traces of iridium, and something else, an element with no spectral match on the periodic table. It emitted a faint blue glow when exposed to sound frequencies between 430 and 440 Hz. The geochemist insisted it was luminescent quartz reacting to vibration. But the physicist shook his head. "Quartz doesn't respond to sound this way," he said. "This is something engineered." The air in the chamber thickened, charged, as though the space had begun to listen. Every movement left echoes that didn't fade but multiplied. They called it resonance feedback, though none could explain its persistence. The data showed a recursive pattern in the magnetic field, waves looping back upon themselves with perfect conservation of energy. No loss, no decay. That was impossible. Entropy itself refused to enter this geometry. The more they studied, the more the numbers betrayed them. The internal temperature remained stable despite external fluctuations. Gravity readings dipped slightly near the central platform, as though mass itself were being redefined. One intern joked that they had found the universe's first Wi-Fi signal. The joke died quickly when the instruments detected a coherent electromagnetic pulse emerging from the platform at regular intervals, exactly every 11.9 seconds, the same rhythm recorded days before. The archaeologist began to understand that the pyramid was not passive. It was responding. But responding to what or whom remained uncertain. Dr. Rahman ran a harmonic spectrum analysis. The waveforms formed visual spirals that resembled the Fibonacci sequence in motion. It was the mathematics of life, encoded into vibration. He called it living geometry. The linguist disagreed. "Not living," he said. "Remembering." The words hung heavy in the air. They continued the survey deeper, following a passage descending in a perfect logarithmic spiral, the same proportion used in galaxies, hurricanes, and seashells. The deeper they went, the more the air vibrated, the hum shifting from a distant murmur to an audible tone. The vibrations affected the instrument's gyroscopes, subtly altering orientation. Their compasses spun freely, as if the magnetic north had been erased. The physicist's data log filled with interference patterns. He whispered that the pyramid was generating its own reference frame, its own direction of up. At the lower chamber, they found a circular dais surrounded by 12 radial lines, each inscribed with microscopic etchings of unknown symbols. Under magnification, the symbols appeared three-dimensional, as though carved simultaneously in multiple planes of reality. A rotating light beam passed through them, splitting into spectra that formed coherent images of orbital paths, Earth, Venus, Mars, and a fourth unknown planet once existing between Mars and Jupiter. The astronomer among them gasped. "The lost planet," she said. They knew. The linguist nodded slowly. Or maybe they remembered because they were there. The phrase unsettled them all. For days they analyzed the structure's harmonics. When they played specific frequencies through speakers, the air itself began to move in patterns. Sand on the floor arranged into perfect mandalas, circles within circles, triangles collapsing into spirals. Every note produced a different pattern, each more complex than the last. The physicist recorded the phenomenon with trembling fascination. "Sound is shaping matter," he said. "It's like the entire structure is a resonant field, a translation device between vibration and form." When they played the frequency corresponding to 7.83 Hz, the Earth's natural resonance, the entire chamber brightened. The walls glowed faintly blue, and for several seconds all electrical instruments froze. Then a projection appeared in the air above the dais. Not light, not hologram, but a field disturbance, like water forming a mirror. Within it shimmered a pattern of intersecting lines, forming what looked like a tetrahedral lattice, an energy field encoded into geometry. The physicist stepped closer, whispering that this was impossible. There was no power source, no medium, yet the field remained stable. When his hand passed through it, his palm tingled with static, and his watch stopped. The projection flickered, revealing what appeared to be star coordinates, numbers aligning with Orion and Sirius. But there were more points, beyond the visible constellation, beyond mapped space, coordinates of places humanity had never seen. They recorded everything, but when they tried to replay the footage, the data was corrupted. Only audio remained, a low hum, followed by a voice that none of them recognized, speaking in a language that sounded like a fusion of Latin and something mechanical. The translation algorithm captured only one clear phrase: "The builders return through harmonic memory." Falk sat in silence for a long time. He thought of the Templar cross in the upper chamber, the symbol aligned with Orion, and how the same pattern now appeared in pure mathematics. It was as if the pyramid had been teaching the same truth across civilizations. Stone to star, chant to code. The archaeologists worked in shifts, trying to understand what the geometry wanted to reveal. They began to notice subtle changes in their perception of time. Watches lagged, audio recordings desynchronized. The further they stayed within the pyramid, the slower their internal sense of minutes became. 1 hour outside equated to nearly 90 minutes within. Time itself was bending. The physicist theorized that the structure acted as a harmonic lens, manipulating the local gravitational field. Space and time were variables in its equation. He whispered, almost in reverence, "They built architecture that could fold chronology." His words felt blasphemous and sacred all at once. The archaeologists grew quieter each day, their voices lowered to match the hum. They communicated in gestures, almost afraid to disturb the symmetry around them. A kind of reverence grew, scientific awe transforming into devotion. The linguist continued decoding patterns, matching them against ancient scripts. He found identical angular motifs in Sumerian tablets, Mayan glyphs, and medieval Templar manuscripts. The same ratios, the same spiral, repeating through human history like a signature left by invisible teachers. He began calling it the fingerprint of the architects. And then, without warning, the hum changed. It became slower, deeper, almost sorrowful. The readings spiked. Instruments recorded a shift in the electromagnetic spectrum, a sudden alignment between the chamber's frequency and Earth's magnetic poles. Outside, the desert wind rose, forming spirals above the excavation site. Sand particles began to glow faintly like charged dust. Inside, the projection reappeared, more defined than before. The lattice unfolded into 3 dimensions, revealing a model of the solar system, but not as it is, as it was. A 4th planet glowed between Mars and Jupiter, labeled with symbols untranslatable. The field pulsed once, twice, then collapsed inward, vanishing into a single point of light that shot upward through the ceiling and into the sky. The instruments died. The hum ceased. For the first time in weeks, there was absolute silence. Falk wrote in his notes, his hand trembling, "We witnessed geometry in motion, a living equation completing itself." He looked around at the team. No one spoke. No one breathed loudly. They all felt it, the presence of intelligence woven through the stone, the sense that they had intruded upon an ongoing conversation between Earth and something beyond. The linguist broke the silence at last. "This isn't just architecture," he said. It's memory encoded in form. The entire planet may be built upon their design. He paused, glancing at the walls that shimmered faintly even now. And if it remembers, he said softly, then perhaps so do we. They sealed the chamber and stepped outside into the desert night. The stars above Orion seemed brighter than before, almost nearer. The dunes had shifted again, forming faint ridges in geometric lines leading away from the pyramid, as if the landscape itself were aligning. The desert wind carried a tone barely audible, like a distant chord played on a cosmic instrument. The archaeologists stood in silence, realizing that the geometry wasn't confined to the structure beneath them. It extended outward, into the sand, into the stars, into the very equations of existence. Falk looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we were mapping it," he said, "but it was measuring us." It appeared first as coincidence, a shadow on stone, a pattern half buried beneath millennia of dust and disbelief. Yet when the archaeologists cleared the wall beneath the third chamber's light shaft, the coincidence became design. The cross lay there, carved with impossible precision, a perfect cross pate, its arms widening in harmonic ratio, its angles aligned with celestial coordinates that no human eyes should have known 20,000 years ago. The team gathered silently around it, as if standing before a mirror that refused to reflect them. The cross glowed faintly under directed light, the material not paint or pigment, but a form of metallic inlay fused seamlessly into the basalt. Its edges were microscopically perfect, showing no signs of chisel or tool. Under magnification, each arm of the cross revealed a lattice structure of intersecting crystalline fibers. The geochemist whispered that it resembled fiber optic strands, except these were mineral. The cross wasn't decoration, it was conduction. Dr. Falk ordered full spectrum analysis. They projected beams of visible and infrared light across the symbol, measuring reflectivity, absorption, polarization. The data made no sense. Each wavelength responded, as if refracted through layers of organized memory. Light entered, bent, and emerged delayed by fractions of time, not by distance, but by interference. It was as if the cross existed slightly out of phase with the chamber around it, vibrating between presence and absence. When they increased the amplitude, the surrounding wall resonated. The hum that had haunted the dig site grew louder, clearer, carrying harmonics that shaped the sand on the floor into symmetrical patterns. Circles within squares, crosses within circles. Falk stared at the oscillating sand, whispering to himself, "The geometry is recursive. It's reading the input." The linguist, his voice trembling between faith and science, said softly, "It's not reading. It's remembering the light." The team continued the test. They passed low-frequency sound waves through the chamber, watching how the cross responded. Every 11.9 seconds, the vibration matched the pyramid's pulse, amplifying into standing waves that formed visible ripples on the metallic inlay. When the amplitude reached resonance, the cross emitted a faint luminescence, a soft blue glow that expanded across the wall like ink spreading through parchment. The physicist gasped as the spectrum analyzer recorded spikes at exact harmonic multiples of 432 Hz. Cosmic resonance again. The same frequency found in the materials of the lower chamber. The cross wasn't ornamental. It was a harmonic key. Falk ordered a stop to all mechanical vibration. Silence returned. Yet the cross continued glowing faintly for several seconds before dimming, as if reluctant to release the energy. The archaeologists exchanged uneasy glances. Nothing in physics should behave this way. They decided to map its geometry in 3 dimensions. Using laser interferometry, they reconstructed the cross at micron precision. The resulting model revealed something breathtaking. The proportions of each arm were not symmetrical as they appeared, but logarithmic. Each curve followed the golden ratio, expanding outward in a continuous spiral rather than a simple line. The symbol, when viewed in 4 dimensions through rotational simulation, formed a torus, a self-sustaining field loop capable of channeling energy without loss. A perfect ancient design for perpetual resonance. "It's not a symbol," Dr. Rahman said quietly. "It's an equation." The linguist nodded. "Or a prayer." They overlaid the cross's geometry with known historical emblems. The resemblance to the Templar insignia was exact. Every proportion, every curve, identical. The cross of a medieval order that claimed to serve divine balance, found in a structure built before human civilization. The coincidence was mathematically impossible. Someone or something had transmitted the same design across time. Falk requested access to electromagnetic imaging. As the sensors pulsed, the screen displayed faint fields extending beyond the wall's surface. The cross radiated a toroidal magnetic halo, reaching 2 meters outward, invisible to the eye but perfectly symmetrical. The readings oscillated with the Earth's magnetic field in real time. Somehow this ancient structure was synchronized with the planet. The physicist theorized that the cross acted as a modulator, a stabilizer for resonance between the Earth's geomagnetic frequency and a broader celestial field. He traced the field lines on the monitor. They arched upward through the ceiling, connecting with the pyramid's apex above, then extending mathematically toward the stars of Orion's belt. The vector aligned perfectly with Alnitak, the easternmost star, the same alignment encoded into the Great Pyramid. The linguist, almost whispering to himself, said, "As above, so below. It's not mythology, it's engineering." They ran deeper analysis of the frequency response. The resonance peaks corresponded to the orbital ratios of Earth, Venus, and Mars. Each arm of the cross seemed to represent one of these celestial paths, intersecting at a central harmonic node that corresponded not to any planet, but to the sun itself. It was a solar equation expressed through sacred geometry. The archaeologists were witnessing the convergence of faith and physics, the language of divinity written as mathematics. As they documented the readings, subtle patterns appeared in the data, binary sequences repeating with fractal regularity. When translated into ASCII representation, the numbers formed symbols identical to those found in early Templar manuscripts. The same sigil known as the Seal of Light, rumored in secret Vatican texts to represent the bridge between the heavens and the earth. Falk stared at the data, realizing they were uncovering the origin of a myth that had survived for centuries in whispers and prophecy. The Templars had not invented their cross, they had rediscovered it. The linguist recalled a passage from a 12th century codex describing a cross of pure illumination carried from the east by knights returning from Jerusalem, said to have been seen within a vault beneath the Temple Mount. The description matched the symbol before them in every detail. The implication was unbearable. The Templars had found this place before, or another like it. The cross had guided them, as it had now guided these scientists. The geochemist noted that the material surrounding the inlay contained microscopic inclusions of magnetite aligned uniformly, as if crystallized within a strong electromagnetic field. Natural processes could not achieve such precision. The field strength required would have exceeded modern laboratory capabilities. And yet, here it was, frozen in perfect order, untouched for 20,000 years. The cross's geometry held structural integrity that resisted erosion, radiation, even entropy. The material seemed to regenerate microfractures over time. They observed nanoscopic reorganization of its surface, atoms migrating to restore symmetry when disturbed. Falk watched the playback of microscopic footage in stunned silence. "It heals itself," he whispered. The linguist smiled faintly. "Sacred things usually do." The physicist attempted to model the energy flow. The simulation produced a rotating field shaped like a Mobius loop, infinite in continuity. Energy entered through one arm of the cross, looped through the toroidal core, and exited through another without loss. The design mirrored the dynamics of a magnetic monopole, a theoretical impossibility in conventional physics. Yet the simulation matched the readings exactly. The archaeologists had uncovered an object that contradicted the laws defining their world. The linguist turned to Falk. "If this is what it seems, the cross is not human." Falk looked at him for a long time before answering. "Perhaps not," he said, "but someone wanted us to remember it." As night fell, they projected the cross's geometric pattern onto the chamber's ceiling. To their astonishment, it aligned perfectly with faint, ancient etchings invisible to the naked eye. Under ultraviolet light, constellations emerged. Orion, Sirius, and a faint pattern beyond, unrecorded in any star catalogue. The lines connecting them formed an enormous cross across the heavens, each star marking an intersection in the same proportions as the one on the wall. The archaeologist stood beneath it, surrounded by silence that felt more like reverence than emptiness. "This is the celestial template," Falk said. "The earthly cross mirrors it exactly." The linguist wrote in his notes, that every civilization had encoded this geometry. Egyptians, Mayans, Hindus, even medieval Christians, each reinterpreting the same equation through the language of their faith. The cross, he concluded, was never a symbol of belief. It was a map of energy, a universal constant written into the structure of space-time. The data confirmed it. Electromagnetic fields from the cross correlated with solar storms, suggesting it acted as a stabilizer, absorbing cosmic energy and redistributing it harmonically through the planet's magnetic lattice. The pyramid was not built to reach the heavens, it was built to anchor them. As the team reviewed the findings, the hum began once more. This time it was faint, musical, almost melodic. The frequency stabilized at exactly 528 Hz, the tone ancient traditions called the frequency of love, associated with DNA repair and resonance in biological systems. The physicist checked his readings twice. "The energy output is biological," he said, disbelief heavy in his voice. "This thing interacts with life." They left the instruments running overnight. By morning, the data revealed fluctuations corresponding to the team's movements, as if the cross responded to their proximity, their pulse, their breath. The archaeologists realized the truth that both awed and frightened them. The structure wasn't only built to align with the cosmos, it was aware of those who observed it. The linguist said softly, "It measures consciousness." Falk nodded, "and translates it into light." He placed his hand near the wall, not touching, but close enough to feel a warmth that wasn't physical. The faint glow returned, pulsing gently in sync with his heartbeat. For a moment, he imagined that the cross was remembering him, cataloguing his presence the way it once remembered the stars. He turned to the team and said in a whisper, "We're not just studying their work, we're standing inside their equation." The air shimmered faintly, almost like approval. The glow faded. Silence returned. The archaeologist stood motionless, unwilling to speak, afraid that words might break whatever fragile equilibrium held them within that harmonic field. When they finally stepped out of the chamber, the night sky above the desert mirrored the symbol below, Orion's belt perfectly framed between the dunes, the stars pulsing faintly as if echoing the rhythm of the hum they had left behind. The linguist looked upward and murmured, "Faith was just a shadow of geometry." Falk didn't answer. He already knew that somewhere within the code of light and matter, between symbol and science, lay a truth that humanity had once known and then forgotten. And now, beneath the sand of ages, it had begun to remember itself again. The desert at night was not silent. It spoke in tremors, in magnetic sighs, in the low hum of a planet remembering itself. The team camped outside the excavation chamber, surrounded by monitors that pulsed faintly with residual data from the cross. The readings never reached zero. Even at rest, the pyramid breathed, an electromagnetic rhythm beating in sync with the rotation of the Earth. Falk watched the data scroll endlessly across the screens, numbers converging into patterns that no algorithm could explain. The energy spikes came at fixed intervals, every 86164 seconds, the exact duration of a sidereal day. The structure was not tracking the sun, it was tracking the stars. When the linguist noticed the interval, he said softly, "It's listening to the heavens." At dawn, they recalibrated the spectrometer toward the opening shaft that led from the chamber to the sky. The device caught faint radiation peaks corresponding to specific wavelengths of starlight. 3 dominant frequencies stood out, matching precisely the spectral signatures of Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, the 3 stars of Orion's belt. The discovery froze them in place. The pyramid was literally tuned to Orion. Falk verified the data 3 times. The readings persisted. The alignment wasn't symbolic or mythic. It was active. The chamber received starlight, like a receiver tuned to a broadcast across time. The physicist ran a Fourier analysis on the signal and found modulation embedded within the light, pulses repeating in prime number sequences, a mathematical fingerprint impossible for random stellar noise. The stars were transmitting structured information, or the pyramid was interpreting them that way. The linguist suggested that the modulation might be encoded geometry, a translation of celestial vibration into harmonic form. "A message carved in light," he murmured, "and we built receivers without knowing." Falk remembered how ancient texts described Orion as the cradle of gods and builders, a place of origin rather than destination. Maybe those myths weren't wrong. Maybe they were translations of something too vast to name. The physicist recalculated the geometry of the pyramid's orientation. Its base vector pointed exactly 11.9 degrees east of true north, an offset that aligned the apex directly with Orion's belt during the epoch corresponding to 20,000 years before the present. The offset was intentional. The builders had encoded precession into their design, accounting for the wobble of Earth's axis millennia in advance. They knew time as geometry, Falk said, not as a line but as rotation. The statement felt heavy, almost liturgical. The archaeologists began to test whether the incoming light affected the electromagnetic field. As they simulated starlight through focused beams, the sensors registered harmonic amplification. The pyramid didn't just absorb light, it resonated with it. Each wavelength produced a corresponding tone within the audible range, converting photons into sound. When they replicated the light of Orion, the hum returned stronger than ever, vibrating through the ground, through their bones, through thought itself. The sound was not chaotic. It carried rhythm and pitch, a subtle modulation that evoked memory rather than music. The linguist began transcribing it as notation, realizing that each harmonic peak corresponded to intervals found in ancient chant systems. He recalled the patterns of the Sufi zikr, the resonance of Gregorian choirs, the overtone scales of Tibetan monks, all derived, perhaps unconsciously, from the same cosmic geometry. The pyramid was teaching the song of creation. The data correlated perfectly with energy measurements from the surrounding desert. Over a radius of several kilometers, magnetic anomalies formed concentric circles centered on the pyramid. The ground conductivity changed with each cycle of the hum. Satellite readings confirmed faint electromagnetic emissions matching the Schumann resonance, 7.83 Hz, propagating through the ionosphere above. The Earth itself had begun to sing in harmony with the structure. "It's coupling," the physicist whispered. "The pyramid and the planet are resonating as one system." Falk watched the readings rise, feeling a quiet awe that bordered on fear. "If that's true," he said, "this isn't a monument. It's a transmitter." The realization hung in the air. A transmitter to where or to whom? None could answer. But the pattern of Orion above seemed to pulse faintly brighter each night, as if acknowledging the rediscovery of an ancient connection. They measured the harmonics again at midnight. The electromagnetic spectrum shifted slightly, introducing new frequencies in the millimeter wave range, frequencies consistent with interstellar communication. The linguist looked at the data and said, "It's waiting for the alignment." He referred to the upcoming zenith passage of Orion, when the constellation would stand directly overhead. It would happen in 7 days. Until then, the pyramid remained quiet, like an instrument tuning itself. The team devoted their time to modeling the structure in digital simulation. The results defied all known engineering principles. The pyramid's shape produced energy vortices that minimized entropy, recycling resonance in closed loops. Falk realized that the entire architecture was a stabilization field, a harmonic anchor connecting celestial cycles with planetary motion. He compared it to an antenna, using the planet itself as a resonant cavity. The calculations suggested that if the structure were activated fully, its field would extend into space, forming a standing wave large enough to modulate electromagnetic properties of the ionosphere, a planetary-scale harmonic bridge. The implications were overwhelming. The archaeologists sat in silence around the screens, feeling the weight of a truth that extended far beyond archaeology. The linguist whispered, "This is not human architecture. It's terrestrial only in material." Falk nodded slowly. "And if it's connected to Orion," he said, "then it might be part of something larger, a lattice, a network." He plotted the coordinates of other ancient sites, Giza, Teotihuacan, Angkor, Stonehenge, and found their angular relationships corresponded to specific declinations of Orion and Sirius at different epochs. The sites were aligned not randomly, but sequentially, forming a geometric spiral across the globe, a planetary blueprint. Each location resonated with similar base frequencies, as though each were a node in a harmonic circuit. "They built the Earth as a resonator," Falk said, his voice barely audible. The physicist added, "or as an instrument." They began cross-referencing global magnetic data. The anomalies fit perfectly along ley lines, long dismissed as myth. But the math was irrefutable. Energy propagated through these paths in measurable waves, modulated by the same frequency patterns now detected in the pyramid. The archaeologists were mapping the heartbeat of the planet, an ancient engineering project whose purpose no one could guess. Late that night, as Falk watched the data, he noticed faint interference patterns recurring every 23 minutes, too regular for noise. He isolated the signal and ran it through the audio processor. The waveform converted into a sound like wind filtered through glass, soft, rising, falling, pulsing with cadence. The linguist translated the intervals into ratios and recognized the sequence 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, the Fibonacci progression, the same code of living forms. "This isn't a message," he said. "It's calibration," as if the Earth and Orion were synchronizing their memory through vibration. On the sixth night, a sandstorm swept across the site, fierce and relentless. The team sought shelter in the lower chamber, surrounded by the hum that seemed to intensify as the storm raged. Instruments showed rising field strength. Lightning struck miles away, yet the static readings inside the pyramid remained undisturbed. The chamber was shielded by an invisible barrier, absorbing electromagnetic energy and converting it into resonance. The physicist watched the graphs in disbelief. "It's feeding on the storm," he said. The linguist replied softly, "Or the storm is feeding on it." When the winds finally subsided, the sky cleared in a way they had never seen. Black so deep it felt like falling upward, stars burning with unnatural clarity. The pyramid's apex shimmered faintly under starlight. Sensors placed outside captured ionization around its summit, faint blue plasma dancing like auroras trapped in stone. The countdown to Orion's zenith began. The archaeologists prepared their instruments, though they no longer knew whether they were studying or participating. The night of alignment arrived with unbearable stillness. As Orion reached its highest point, the pyramid responded. The hum deepened, resonant waves passing through sand and flesh alike. The stars seemed to flicker in rhythm, each pulse mirrored by subtle magnetic shifts measured by their instruments. Then, at the peak of alignment, the cross on the wall illuminated again, this time without stimulus. Blue light radiated from its core, filling the chamber with silent brilliance. The sound ceased, replaced by a stillness so absolute it felt like the air itself was suspended. Falk whispered, "It's receiving." The monitors displayed impossible data, quantum fluctuations corresponding to distant stellar coordinates. The pyramid was acting as a quantum resonator, entangled across space with Orion, a bridge not through distance, but through frequency. Information was being exchanged at light speed, maybe faster. Patterns appeared on the monitors, geometric fields rotating, expanding, collapsing into spirals. The linguist recognized some of them. They matched diagrams from ancient alchemical texts, the same patterns used by medieval mystics to describe divine architecture. They were seeing the same thing the Templars must have seen, and then as quickly as it began, the light faded. The readings stabilized. The hum dissolved into silence. The archaeologists remained still for a long time, unable to speak, as if language itself had been rendered obsolete. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying grains of sand that glittered faintly blue before vanishing into darkness. Falk finally spoke, his voice fragile but calm. "We built telescopes to look outward," he said, "but they built this to remember inward." The linguist nodded. "Maybe Orion isn't a place," he said. "Maybe it's a frequency, a memory the Earth keeps alive." They left the chamber in silence, the air still faintly charged. Above them, Orion shimmered like an open eye, its light delayed by millennia, but somehow immediate, intimate. The stars looked closer than they should, as if leaning toward the planet that had finally remembered their name. The pyramid beneath the sand vibrated once imperceptibly, a last echo from a conversation between worlds. The night absorbed it. The desert, as always, kept the secret. The descent began at dawn. The light above the desert was soft, diffused through a haze of gold and ash. The horizon curved like the edge of an immense lens. Beneath that sky, the archaeologists prepared to enter the lowest section of the pyramid, the chamber that instruments had mapped but never fully resolved, the point of magnetic origin. The passage spiraled downward in near-perfect logarithmic proportion, the curvature identical to the Nautilus shell, a design repeated in galaxies and hurricanes. The deeper they went, the weaker their compasses became, until the needles spun aimlessly, following invisible currents. Falk walked at the front, his steps deliberate, recording magnetic readings at every meter. The data shifted in increments too smooth to be natural. The field wasn't random. It pulsed. Every 20 meters, the polarity reversed, forming concentric shells of alternating direction, a magnetic labyrinth encoded into architecture. The physicist whispered that it resembled the geometry of a toroidal field, the same shape used to describe magnetic confinement in plasma reactors. Yet here, it existed in stone, crafted by hands that predated metallurgy. The deeper they went, the less sound carried. Words dissolved into air before reaching the ear. Each footstep seemed absorbed by the walls, as if the stone itself preferred silence. The air grew dense, electric. Static brushed across their skin like invisible threads. When they reached the threshold of the chamber, all instruments failed simultaneously. Screens froze. Recordings stopped. Only analog needles twitched, spinning erratically, and then settling into stillness. Falk lifted his light. The chamber opened before them, a sphere carved within the heart of the pyramid, its surface smooth as glass, shimmering faintly with luminescent veins that pulsed in slow rhythm. The room had no corners, no floor, no ceiling. It was pure curvature, space folded inward upon itself. In the center hovered a structure unlike any they had seen, a ring suspended above a shallow depression of metallic sand. The ring rotated slowly, not by mechanism but by field, levitating with perfect stability. It was silent, yet every part of the body felt its vibration. The physicist crouched, scanning the air density. "It's ionized," he said softly. "There's a field holding it up." The linguist stepped closer, noticing engravings on the ring's inner surface, symbols repeating in spirals, the same patterns found on the cross, but rearranged into a continuous sequence. The ring was both language and machine. Falk approached with care, every instinct torn between reverence and curiosity. He extended his sensor wand, measuring magnetic flux. The readings exceeded scale. The field strength was impossible, orders of magnitude higher than any natural geomagnetic source, yet perfectly stable. It didn't repel or attract. It rotated space itself. The physicist placed a metal sample near the field. The fragment hovered, spinning gently, then disintegrated into fine dust that hung suspended like glitter in sunlight. There was no heat, no combustion. The atoms had simply lost cohesion. "It's not magnetism," he whispered. "It's field resonance manipulating atomic bonds." The linguist raised his recorder and spoke softly, though the air swallowed his words. "We are inside a magnetic memory core. The structure isn't transmitting outward. It's storing something." The theory grew in their minds like an infection. The pyramid wasn't a monument nor a beacon. It was an archive, a repository of encoded energy structured through magnetism and geometry. The walls pulsed again, faintly, as if responding to thought. The physicist placed a palm near the surface. The glow intensified slightly beneath his hand, spreading outward in concentric rings. He stepped back, heart pounding. "It's sensing electromagnetic fields, including ours." Falk nodded, his voice low. "It reads us as we read it." He asked the linguist to recite a tone at 432 Hertz, the frequency most resonant with the upper chambers. The man hesitated, then hummed softly into the still air. The ring trembled. Light expanded from its center, refracting through the chamber in waves like water. The hum deepened, matching the tone precisely before exceeding it, producing harmonic overtones that resonated through their bones. Every measurement device reactivated at once, recording fields fluctuating in synchronized phase with the human voice. The pyramid was responding musically. It recognized harmonic intention. The physicist stared at the readings, whispering, "It's coupling biological frequency with the field. It's translating consciousness into magnetism." The linguist stopped singing. The light faded instantly. Silence returned, heavy and aware. Falk exhaled slowly. "We need to know what it stores," he said. "Not faith, not myth, data." They positioned an induction coil near the ring, hoping to measure induced current. The moment the probe entered the field, it began to vibrate violently. The metal glowed red, then white, then vanished, its atoms scattered into the ionized air. The monitors registered no energy transfer. only a momentary distortion in local gravity. Objects near the center lifted a few centimeters from the ground before settling again. The physicist turned pale. "It's converting matter into field," he said, "and it's doing it without energy loss." The implication was unbearable. This structure obeyed no conservation laws. It was a perpetual transformation engine, mass to energy, energy to memory. Falk stared at the ring, thinking of all the myths that spoke of the Ark, of relics that could speak with the divine, of stones that shone with the voice of creation. What if those stories were echoes of this, fragments of human memory preserved through generations, retold by witnesses who no longer understood what they had seen? He walked closer. The air grew denser. His shadow bent strangely on the wall, curving upward. Space itself seemed distorted near the ring. He reached out, not touching, but feeling warmth emanating from the center, as if the void itself had a pulse. His wristwatch stopped. The second hand froze at 12, trembling faintly. He looked upward. The ceiling shimmered like liquid light. Reflections moved where there should be none. He turned to the physicist. "We're inside a field gradient strong enough to distort time." The man nodded slowly, whispering, "A gravitational lens, artificial." The data confirmed it. Temporal dilation varied across the chamber's radius. At the perimeter, time passed normally. Near the ring, it slowed fractionally. They had entered a localized warping of space-time generated by harmonic geometry. The pyramid wasn't simply built with sacred proportions. It used them to manipulate the physical constants of reality. The linguist, pale and shaking, opened his notebook. "This is how they stored information," he said. "Not on paper or metal, but in resonance fields. Every vibration carries pattern. The field is the memory, and it's still intact." Falk's voice was barely audible. "If that's true, then whatever built this never needed language. The structure is the message." They continued recording. The data showed recursive harmonic modulation, signals looping back in endless feedback, repeating patterns that resembled binary code overlaid with fractal complexity. The physicist called it quantum harmonics of information. The linguist called it speech without sound. Both were right. The pyramid was speaking, but in a language of physics and geometry that human cognition could barely perceive. When Falk adjusted the harmonic generator to match the fundamental frequency, the ring brightened once more, its rotation accelerating until the inner engravings formed a blur of light. Then it stopped. Not gradually, but absolutely. All motion ceased, yet the light remained suspended, frozen in mid-vibration. The field stabilized. On the monitors, data appeared unprompted, binary sequences cascading across the screen. The linguist translated them through the same algorithms used for ancient pattern decoding. The message emerged, simple, unadorned, mathematical. Orionis 1 connection restored. The team stared in disbelief. The machine had identified itself, and something else. A connection. Falk whispered, "It's linked to another." The physicist checked the readings. A secondary magnetic signal was emanating from deep beneath the structure, moving northward, intersecting the coordinates of the Nile basin, then disappearing toward the Mediterranean. A line of resonance stretching across continents, forming an invisible network. The linguist whispered, "A chain of memory nodes. This is only one." The magnetic pulse repeated at intervals, broadcasting through the ionosphere. Outside, the wind rose again, though there was no storm. The sand around the pyramid shifted, forming ripples aligned with the cardinal points. Instruments above ground registered minute fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field across thousands of kilometers. Something vast had awakened. The archaeologists could not tell whether they had activated the structure or merely allowed it to resume what it had always been doing. The ring pulsed once, softly. A tone filled the chamber, neither high nor low, but everywhere, resonating in thought rather than ear. For an instant, the walls became transparent. They could see the strata of stone like layers of light, each vibrating at a different frequency, forming a column of living geometry. At the core of the ring, a shape appeared, a sphere within a cube within a spiral, the same impossible architecture first detected in LiDAR scans. It rotated slowly, fractal, infinite, and within it shimmered three luminous points arranged in a perfect line: Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, Mintaka, Orion's belt. The team watched in silence. The linguist's eyes filled with tears. "It's showing us where it came from," he said. The sphere contracted, leaving behind a single thread of light that touched the chamber floor and etched a pattern of glowing symbols before fading. Falk knelt, tracing them. The arrangement matched the coordinates of the world's oldest megalithic sites: Giza, Teotihuacan, Stonehenge, all aligned through one harmonic system. The pyramid was the master key. The physicist looked up, his voice unsteady. "We're inside the planet's memory archive," he said. "This is how Earth connects to the stars." The ring dimmed slowly, its rotation resuming at a slower pace, the hum descending into inaudibility. The instruments cooled, gravity normalized. Time resumed its usual rhythm. The archaeologists stood in silence, unable to speak, knowing they had crossed a boundary no human had ever documented. Falk wrote in his field journal, his handwriting trembling, "The laws we obey are not the limits of creation. They are the local dialect of a greater language. The builders spoke it fluently. They left the chamber in silence, carrying data that could shatter every known discipline. As they ascended, the air grew lighter, but the sense of gravity within their thoughts remained heavier than ever. Outside, the sun rose pale over the dunes. The sand was still, yet the compasses continued to spin. Falk looked once more toward the horizon, where Orion's fading light lingered in the dawn, and whispered to himself, "Memory has weight." The first sign that something was wrong came at dawn. The computers in the command tent rebooted without command, fans spinning quietly in unison, monitors flickering between black and white static. When the operating systems finally returned, every folder containing magnetic readings from the lower chamber was empty. The file names remained, but the data was gone. At first they suspected hardware failure, a corrupted drive. The physicist removed the primary storage unit, connecting it to an isolated backup terminal. The result was the same: 0 bytes recorded. The log files that confirmed their existence the night before were still there, time-stamped and untouched. It was as if the numbers had been erased not by deletion, but by revision, rewritten as nothing. Falk ordered a full diagnostic. The software showed no trace of tampering, no external intrusion, no malware, no human access. It was as if the files had never contained information at all. The linguist checked the analog records, the notebooks, the handwritten calculations, the printed graphs. The ink had faded overnight. Entire pages were blank, the paper unburned, untouched. Only indentation marks remained, as if the memory of writing persisted after language was gone. The physicist whispered, "It's not the machines. It's the data itself." The phrase made no sense, yet everyone understood. The numbers they had extracted from the pyramid were being unmade. Falk compared the few remaining field logs on his tablet. Even those readings fluctuated before his eyes, digits rearranging in real time. Magnetic intensities shifted, coordinates altered themselves, timestamps reverted backward. "It's recursive corruption," he said. "Information decay propagating through storage." The linguist replied, "Or it's defending itself." The theory sounded absurd until they remembered what the pyramid had done, its ability to interact with observation, to convert thought into resonance. What if the data they had taken was not inert? What if it was alive? Falk paced the tent, trying to think like a scientist rather than a witness. He ordered all remaining data drives, sealed in lead containers. The physicist hesitated. "It won't matter," he said. "If it's electromagnetic, shielding won't stop it." Still, they complied. The geochemist checked the analog magnetic tapes, older, mechanical, resistant to digital interference. The sound they had recorded of the hum was intact. They played it through a small speaker. At first, it was only the familiar vibration, low and resonant. Then, after 20 seconds, a faint modulation appeared. The hum changed pitch, rising slightly, forming intervals like whispered syllables. The linguist froze. "That wasn't there before," he said. The sound began to pulse at regular intervals, every 11.9 seconds, the same rhythm as the pyramid's field. The physicist pulled the plug, but the hum continued faintly, even after the speaker was disconnected. It vibrated through the metal of the table, through the air, through them. Outside, the desert was unnaturally still. The wind had stopped. The silence was physical, pressing against the ears. Above them, the stars of Orion still lingered, pale against the daylight, refusing to fade. Falk stepped outside, shielding his eyes. The dunes had shifted again overnight, their formation no longer random. They radiated outward from the pyramid in perfect spirals visible from the camp's elevated ridge. The shape matched the magnetic field lines from their missing data. The desert had become an instrument. Back inside, the physicist checked the radio frequencies. Static filled the spectrum. But beneath the noise was pattern, low-frequency modulation matching the missing recordings. He tried to isolate the signal, but each attempt resulted in loss of equipment calibration. The receivers detuned themselves, resetting to blank frequencies. "It's interfering with electromagnetic memory," he said. "Every time we observe it, the signal collapses." The linguist thought of quantum experiments, how observation determines state. "Maybe it's not collapsing," he said softly. "Maybe it's choosing what remains." Falk frowned. "You mean it's curating?" "No," the linguist said. "It's editing." They retrieved the written notes from the previous day. The sentences were intact until the description of the lower chamber. Every line after that was blank, the ink absorbed into the fibers. The geochemist suggested chemical degradation from ionized dust. Falk disagreed. Dust doesn't remove memory selectively. By evening, the anomaly spread. The backup servers connected by satellite to the University Archive in Geneva reported data corruption originating from the remote end. The files transmitted earlier had become empty placeholders, identical to those on site. When Falk tried to access the cloud backup, the system denied existence of the upload. The linguist checked the transaction logs. No record remained of any transfer. He whispered, "It's rewriting history." The physicist leaned back, exhaustion overtaking logic. Then history must be part of the system. Outside, a faint wind returned, carrying static electricity strong enough to lift fine grains of sand into the air. The pyramid pulsed faintly beneath the surface, the apex barely visible under the drifting dunes. The compasses still spun, tracing invisible orbits. The sun set, red and swollen, light refracting through the storm. That night, they attempted to record new readings. Analog instruments only, no digital devices. Falk called out measurements. The physicist wrote them by hand. The numbers remained stable for several minutes. Then the paper itself began to heat, faintly at first, then noticeably warm. Letters distorted. Ink bled sideways. The page became translucent, the writing vanishing slowly as though the paper remembered its original whiteness and desired to return to it. The linguist looked at Falk and said, "We're trying to measure something that refuses permanence." The physicist whispered, "It's erasing witnesses." The team slept uneasily, haunted by the hum that seemed to follow them even in dreams. They woke to the sound of static again, not from equipment, but from the air itself. Tiny arcs of electricity danced across metal surfaces, forming faint blue lines. The geochemist recorded the phenomenon with a thermal camera. The image glitched instantly, freezing at a single frame. The outline of the pyramid glowing from within, a web of energy stretching outward like veins through the desert. The file saved correctly. Then, seconds later, it vanished from the camera's memory card. Only the file name remained, Orionis 1312. Falk recognized the designation from the inscription in the magnetic chamber. His breath caught. The number was identical. The machine was identifying the data, cataloging it. It was taking back its memory. At noon, they lost satellite contact. The radio channels filled with bursts of static punctuated by short sequences of tones, 3 long, 1 short, 3 long again. The physicist listened carefully. "That's Morse code," he said. "It's repeating SOS." The signal originated from beneath them. The linguist stared at the monitors, whispering, "It's not asking for help. It's asking for attention." The air pressure in the tent shifted slightly, a vibration beneath the floor, rhythmic and steady. The desert itself was transmitting. When the physicist analyzed the waveform, he discovered embedded data, sequences corresponding to their original magnetic readings, as though the lost files were now encoded in the hum. "It's rewriting our work into the medium of the planet," he said. "Information doesn't disappear. It migrates." Falk closed his eyes. "And what if we're part of that migration?" That night, every light in the camp flickered. The computers shut down completely. Batteries drained beyond recharge. The satellite uplink dish rotated by itself, pointing north. The linguist noticed the alignment. It matched the magnetic line they had traced from the pyramid to the Mediterranean. The geochemist whispered, It's sending everything to the next node. They gathered outside, illuminated only by the dim starlight. The wind had stopped again. The air tasted metallic. Above them, Orion was brighter than it had ever been, the belt forming a perfect vertical line over the pyramid's apex. For several seconds, the stars pulsed, slow and synchronized. The desert surface vibrated, a deep subsonic tone passing through their bones. The sound was both within and without. The physicist checked the last working analog seismograph. The needle was moving rhythmically, not from earthquakes, but from resonance. Frequency 783 Hertz, the Earth's natural pulse. The pyramid had synchronized it. Then the equipment fell silent. Every light extinguished. Absolute darkness. They stood motionless, unable to see even their own hands. And in that blackness came the sound, soft, distant, like the whisper of sand against glass. A voice formed within it, not human, not mechanical, but harmonic, a synthesis of tone and thought. It spoke only once. The linguist translated it later, writing by memory the only phrase he remembered. Memory does not belong to those who measure it. Then the voice was gone. The lights returned one by one, their power inexplicably restored. But every recording device was blank again, not erased but rewritten. Metadata intact, content null. The files still bore their names. Magnetic core scan, Orion alignment, field log day 7. Each file exactly 1,112 kilobytes in size. Falk stared at the number until the truth settled cold in his chest. The system wasn't deleting, it was categorizing. Each piece of their discovery was being absorbed into a structure beyond their control, organized by the same designation, Orionis 1312. The project had become part of the archive. They left the site days later, exhausted and hollow, carrying nothing but fragments of notes and their memories. Yet even memory felt unstable, as if events rearranged themselves each time they tried to recall them. On the flight out of Sudan, the geochemist glanced at her laptop, still lifeless since the blackout. The screen flickered once, showing a single frame. The desert at night, the pyramid illuminated by faint blue light. Then the screen went dark again. Falk closed his eyes, realizing that the image wasn't gone. It was waiting somewhere, stored in a field that no longer cared for human understanding. The world above continued, indifferent. In the archives of Geneva, technicians later reported corrupted signals received via satellite, all carrying the same header, Orionis 1312. No content, only silence measured in light. The team never spoke publicly of what they had seen. Within a year, the research was officially declassified as inconclusive. The digital footprint of the mission vanished from institutional servers, leaving only references with dead links. The coordinates of the site were sealed under geological survey restrictions. And yet, months later, faint electromagnetic anomalies were recorded simultaneously in Cairo, Malta, and northern Spain, each synchronized to Orion's rising. The signal carried no data, only a rhythm. 11.9 seconds, the heartbeat of something that had never stopped remembering. The flight from Khartoum to Geneva lasted 9 hours by the clock, though to those who had left the desert, it felt much longer, as if time itself had stretched thin over the memory of what they had seen. Falk sat by the window, the desert vanishing beneath clouds, his reflection pale against the glass. The hum still echoed faintly in his ears, not sound, not tinnitus, but the ghost of vibration, as if his own atoms remembered a different rhythm. The team was silent. No one spoke of the erased data, the blank drives, the voice in the dark. They had agreed it was best to wait until the Foundation reviewed the material. Yet beneath that agreement lay a fear unspoken, that there would be no review, only disappearance. At the Geneva Research Facility, representatives of the Helios Foundation received them with rehearsed neutrality. Their badges bore the sigil of an upward spiral enclosed by a circle, a logo Falk had never noticed before. They were polite, precise, and disturbingly calm. The team handed over every remaining device, notebook, and specimen. The Foundation's archivist recorded each item, tagging it under a new classification, Project Orionis. No mention of the year, the team, or the location. When Falk asked about data recovery, the archivist smiled faintly and said, "There is no data to recover, Dr. Falk. There is only what remains useful." The words settled in the room like dust. Over the following days, interviews were conducted individually. Questions focused less on results and more on recollection. When did you first hear the resonance? How long were you inside the magnetic chamber? Did you experience distortion of time perception? The phrasing was clinical, detached. Falk realized they were not investigating the discovery, they were testing the witnesses. After his third interview, he noticed that every response he gave felt rehearsed, as though someone had whispered the answers in advance. The linguist, pale and withdrawn, confessed that he had been dreaming in mathematical sequences, spirals, ratios, harmonic intervals. Each morning he woke to find pages of his notebook filled with symbols he did not remember writing, perfectly drawn, repeating the geometry of the cross. The physicist reported anomalies in his laboratory instruments, compasses drifting, superconducting coils vibrating faintly when Orion rose above the horizon. He dismantled the devices, checked the circuits, found nothing. The phenomenon persisted. In Cairo, seismic sensors registered harmonic tremors matching 7.83 Hz, synchronized across 3 continents. The frequency was global now. The Helios Foundation released no public statement. When Falk requested access to the site's coordinates for publication, his email was returned with an automated notice. Access denied. Record not found. He tried again from a different address. The reply was the same. The file no longer existed. One by one, the members of the expedition began to vanish, not physically but administratively. Their names were removed from institutional directories, their research papers retracted for methodological inconsistencies. Online records of the mission disappeared, replaced by generic geological survey entries. Even the photographs from the excavation faded from digital archives. Within weeks, it was as if they had never been there. The geochemist resigned and left for South America, claiming she could no longer sleep without hearing the hum through walls. The linguist stopped teaching, retreating into private research. He wrote to Falk once, his message brief. "The pattern is replicating through thought. The symbols appear when I dream. Be careful what you remember." Then he stopped replying. Falk continued to analyze what fragments remained, the corrupted audio files, the few paper notes not yet faded. Late one night, as he examined the waveform of the hum, he noticed a faint modulation buried within the static. He amplified it, slowing the playback until the noise resolved into structure. Beneath the sound was a second frequency, subsonic, rhythmic, deliberate. He converted it into a visual spectrum. The image formed the outline of a cross, then a spiral, then 3 aligned points. Orion's belt. The file metadata showed creation date unknown. Falk leaned back in his chair, feeling the same mixture of awe and dread that had followed him since the chamber. The data was reconstituting itself through the residue of his observation. He disconnected the computer from the network, saving the file on an isolated drive labeled manually, Orionis Resonance. The next morning, the drive was empty. Only the label remained. The Helios Foundation summoned him for another meeting. The room was smaller this time, darker, filled with the quiet hum of refrigeration units. 3 administrators sat across from him, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a woman with a voice too calm to be natural, spoke first. "Dr. Falk, your cooperation is appreciated. The Foundation will continue analysis of Project Orionis internally. Your participation is no longer required." Falk asked, "What about our findings?" The woman tilted her head slightly. "Findings imply measurement. Measurement implies ownership. What you encountered cannot be owned. Therefore, it cannot be published." Her words were logical, precise, and final. As he signed the non-disclosure agreement, Falk noticed the emblem on the document header, a stylized pattern of 3 stars connected by a line. He looked up, but the administrators had already moved on. Outside, the air was colder. Geneva's streets felt narrower than before. His watch ticked irregularly, the second hand skipping every 11.9 seconds. He timed it. The rhythm was exact. That night, Falk dreamed of the chamber again, the ring spinning silently, the magnetic hum now softer, almost compassionate. In the dream, he reached out to touch the ring. It dissolved into light, and beneath it he saw the reflection of his own face multiplied infinitely, each version looking slightly older or younger, each staring back with recognition. When he woke, he wrote the words that echoed in his head. It measures consciousness. Weeks passed. Then came the disappearances. The linguist's apartment in Alexandria was found empty, the walls covered with patterns drawn in graphite, spirals, ratios, symbols identical to those on the magnetic ring. The physicist's car was discovered near the Alps, abandoned, engine cold, keys still in the ignition. No trace of him was ever found. The geochemist stopped responding to messages entirely. Falk received one final email from an untraceable address. The subject line read only, Orionis 1312. The body contained a single attachment, a low-resolution image of the pyramid taken from orbit, the coordinates blurred. Overlaid across the desert were faint luminescent lines connecting to points scattered around the world. Cairo, Jerusalem, Malta, Tibet, Mexico, the same network the pyramid had revealed. The caption below read, "The grid is awake." The message deleted itself seconds after opening. Falk stared at the empty inbox, feeling a calm he could not explain. He began noticing anomalies around him. Streetlights flickered in harmonic rhythm when he passed. His phone compass rotated aimlessly. Clocks near him lost time. He started keeping analog watches, replacing them weekly as each failed. Sometimes, in quiet moments, objects around him vibrated faintly. Pencils, glasses, even air molecules visible through dust. The hum had followed him, faint but constant. A companion threaded through existence. The Foundation continued to monitor him. He saw their vehicles parked near his apartment, unmarked but always the same make, the same color. One evening, as he crossed the street, he met one of the administrators again, the same woman with the calm voice. She smiled as though greeting an old colleague. "It isn't surveillance, Dr. Falk," she said. "It's containment." He asked, "Of what?" She hesitated, then said, "Memory. Once awakened, it must be managed." He wanted to ask more, but she was already walking away, her shadow merging with the city lights. That night, he tested one final experiment. He built a small resonant coil, modeled after the geometry of the cross, calibrated to 432 Hertz. When activated, it produced a faint magnetic field barely detectable by instruments. But after several minutes, the room began to feel heavier, the air dense, like the threshold of a storm. The hum emerged again, low and steady. He turned off the generator, but the sound persisted. The coil vibrated slightly, spinning on its axis without power. The field grew, faint blue light shimmering around the edges of metal. Falk whispered to himself, "It recognizes the pattern." The room filled with soft light. Papers on his desk fluttered, rearranging into geometric order, triangles, spirals, alignments. He felt calm, not fear, as if standing once more inside the chamber. He heard the voice again, the same tone of harmony that had spoken in the desert. It said only one word this time, "Remember." Then the light faded. The coil cooled. The hum ceased. The papers were blank again. The following morning, Falk submitted his resignation from the university. He left Geneva quietly, traveling north without destination. The Helios Foundation released a statement weeks later, citing his departure as a voluntary sabbatical for personal research. Privately, one of the remaining administrators wrote in the internal memo, "Subject retains partial synchronization, memory stable, no further interference required." Years later, scattered reports emerged. Magnetic anomalies near forgotten ruins, instruments registering subsonic pulses at 11.9-second intervals. Archaeologists dismissed them as seismic interference. But in the classified networks of Helios, the data carried a new label, custodian nodes, status active. The Foundation had stopped calling them sites. They were now guardians, each pulse synchronized, maintaining equilibrium across the grid. Somewhere in an unnamed location, deep beneath stone and silence, a pyramid continued to hum softly, translating starlight into memory. And far away, in a quiet town where the night sky was clear and the belt of Orion hung low over the horizon, a man sat alone beside a simple metal coil that glowed faintly blue, eyes closed, listening. The hum surrounded him, endless, patient, precise, like a voice reciting an equation that had no end. The first reports sounded like weather. In coastal towns where the wind spent its life teaching dunes to move, fishermen began to notice new lines etched overnight across the beach. Spirals nested inside triangles, triangles bleeding into circles, precision far too deliberate for tide or breeze. Children traced them with sticks, and called them shells made by the sky. Old men shook their heads and said the ocean had learned a different grammar. Satellite images later confirmed what Feet already suspected. The wind was arranging sand according to ratios that matched the harmonics recorded in the desert pyramid. The patterns appeared at low tide, vanished by noon, and returned at dusk, as if the planet had remembered a lesson it once taught to water. In Malta, a survey drone mapping salt pans at Marsalforn caught a geometry it could not classify, a cross with widening arms, tilted by 9 degrees, its edges softened by brine but intact, oriented toward the winter rising of Orion. The pilot blamed artifacts and recalibrated. The image recurred 3 nights in a row, with slight variations like a phrase repeated in a song. In Nazca, a dust storm revealed faint lines no one had catalogued, briefly visible against the plateau before sand erased them again. 3 points linked by a thread, a belt that refused to be only decoration. In Norway, snow on an abandoned airstrip collected along invisible seams, a flock of crystals arranging themselves into the same widening cross. The airport cameras recorded it for 4 minutes before the feed glitched and returned to blank white, like a page deciding not to speak. The Helios Foundation tracked the anomalies without acknowledging them. Their memos used phrases like aeolian alignment and emergent morphodynamics, and avoided the word memory altogether. The maps in their private briefings told a different story. Red points flaring into existence along coasts and deserts and riverbanks, each synchronized to local sidereal time, each repeating at intervals of 1 sidereal day, as though starlight were a metronome. The linguist, long vanished from directories but not yet from the habit of watching, archived screenshots of public webcams before their feeds went dark. Beaches in Brittany hummed with patterned ridges at dawn. Black sand in Iceland formed concentric rings after storms, rings that matched the shockwave profiles of low-frequency infrasound. In Japan, a rice field flattened by typhoon wind regrew along hexagonal lines like the cross-section of basalt columns. Farmers shrugged and called it the patience of plants. The linguist whispered to no one that grain had learned to read air. He kept a small notebook by the window in a room that had stopped collecting dust. On some mornings before the city woke, he would lift the shade and find the glass faintly filmed with pollen and grit, tiny particles ordered into a phrase he could not translate, letters that were not letters, strokes that belonged to a script that never needed ink. He would breathe on the pane, and the pattern would briefly brighten, then soften, as though choosing whether to be seen. He wrote 1 sentence in the notebook, again and again until the paper began to thin. The wind is writing in a language older than sound. In Cairo, a team of acousticians studying the resonant properties of small mosques built during the Mamluk period discovered an anomaly not in the stone but in the air. Whispered recitation produced standing waves that arranged dust motes along lines identical to those found in the pyramid chamber. The geometry was not confined to ruin. It had migrated into prayer. When they moved microphones outdoors at dawn, the same pattern emerged in the street, in the lull between breath and traffic, as if architecture were a tuning fork and the city a sympathetic string. In a lab at ETH Zurich, a physicist with a reputation for patience suspended quartz grains in still water and exposed the dish to a slow sweep through subsonic frequencies. At 783 Hertz, the grains aligned into a lattice. At 9 seconds of repetition, they shifted into a spiral, then into a widening cross whose arms curled slightly at the ends, like the symbol on a medieval banner that had learned fluid mechanics. She repeated the experiment with other sediments: basalt dust, volcanic ash, limestone powder. The curves formed more cleanly with magnetite, almost snapped into shape when the lab's magnetic shielding was disabled and the Earth's field was allowed to enter. She published a brief note about pattern formation in granular media and omitted everything that mattered. In the Atacama, night sky cameras placed to catch meteors began recording faint lines, falling not downward, but sideways across the starfield. Threads of ionization invisible to human eyes, aligned with Orion when the constellation climbed and with Sirius when it set. The data looked like scratches until someone overlaid them with ground anomalies and realized the scratches were bridges. The ionosphere had started sketching the same language the sand spoke below. In the Vatican's long corridor, where no microphones recorded and pens clicked softly in the presence of paper, A working group convened to discuss nothing that could be quoted. They had seen the same maps, the same magnetograms, the same satellite noise that wasn't noise. A Monsignor who believed in the employments of humility proposed a phrase to describe what the world refused to call by name: custodial emergence. The phrase was tidy and asked for no miracles. The room nodded, then fell into prayer, because sometimes prayer is the only method left to institutions when metrics fail. Across oceans, in a classroom where chalk dust still obeyed gravity rather than software, a teacher noticed that drawings on the board held their shape longer when she sketched spirals into triangles before erasing. She lowered her arm and watched residue cling faintly to the slate along lines it had not obeyed the day before. She smiled without comfort and told her students that matter grows obedient to habit. They believed her because the board had already agreed. Reports multiplied. A hurricane arranged debris into curves seen from drones and dismissed as pareidolia. A lake's receding shoreline left glyphs in silt that matched prehistoric petroglyphs in a cave miles away. A city's smog painted a faint cross of clean air above a stone church at noon. Visible only when viewed from the exact angle a mason would have chosen to see his work align with the sun. Each event alone was a curiosity, a shrug disguised as science. Together, they spelled a sentence no one could afford to read aloud. The Helios Foundation added a new column to their internal tables: phase compliance. Sites above a score of 80 began to emit measurable infrasound during Orion's transit. Some produced faint blue luminescence in fog. Instruments placed discreetly near ancient wells recorded pH shifts synchronized with geomagnetic variations, as if water were answering a question not asked. A small observatory in Chile, independent and perpetually underfunded, pointed a spectrograph at Alnitak and found modulation too orderly for distance. They published a preprint noting a terrestrial source contaminating their gear and asked larger facilities to confirm. 2 days later, their server returned a polite error, and their grant committee advised them to study comets. The sand kept writing. On an empty stretch of Moroccan coast, tide and wind co-authored a perfect torus 30 meters across, a donut of granules held in shape by nothing visible, edges crisp as if baked. A child ran into the ring and laughed when her footprints outside the circle were deep and inside were light, as though gravity had relaxed its agreement with her. Her father filmed it. The file saved. The upload failed. The clip survived only as a description the family told at dinner until the story settled into rumor and the rumor into weather. Not all languages chose sand. In an alpine valley, frost etched radial lines on a frozen pond. Each spoke pointing toward a dolmen on the ridge. When the sun rose, the ice sang, long tones carrying far down the rock, and the sound printed feathery dendrites across the surface like script laid by winter. In a Malaysian cave, guano collected along arcs no biologist could explain. Concave where the bats would not have flown. Convex where they must. A ranger with no training in mathematics sketched the curves and mailed the drawings to a friend who liked conspiracies. The friend drew a cross through them and did not sleep well for a week. Cities listened too, unwilling and indifferent. Subways at off-peak hours carried a tone at platform edges, measured by artists with field recorders, and dismissed by maintenance crews with long experience in dismissing. Transformers hummed a little lower when Orion rose. Elevators paused between floors, hesitant, then resumed, the delay exactly 11.9 seconds long, to the annoyance of nobody who knew what 11.9 had begun to mean. In a rural hospital, portable ECGs drifted by a fraction that could not be blamed on lead placement. The cardiologist wrote a note to himself and threw it away. The language of sand had chosen a dialect of current. All of this reached Falk as a weather of coincidences. He had left Geneva, exchanged email for letters, instruments for the discipline of waiting, and yet the hum located him wherever he tried to be absent. He noticed his tea leaves settling in spirals too tight for convection alone. He left a window open and found on his table the faintest scatter of dust arranged into 3 dots and a line. He wiped it away with the back of his hand and stood watching the light for an hour, while nothing happened ostentatiously and everything moved in the shape of consent. He received a single postcard with no return address and the image of a lighthouse he did not recognize. On the margin, a sentence written in a hand like the linguists said only, "The grid speaks where we do not." He put the card in a book and forgot which, an act of faith disguised as negligence. The Foundation's field reports began to include a column no one explained: human entrainment. At nodes with high phase compliance, people nearby reported the same dreams without meeting: stairs repeating downward, a ring hovering above a hollow of iron sand, a humming that felt like a room learning to breathe. At one site, the dreams included a phrase in languages the dreamers did not share. When translated, the meanings agreed: "We return through memory." Helios recommended increased distance between residents and sites during Orion's transit, a suggestion couched as a public health measure regarding sleep hygiene. The recommendation held for a month and then eroded the way suggestions do when they do not make moral sense to those asked to obey. A handful of researchers tried to publish cautiously. An acoustician in Lisbon wrote about infrasound coherence in coastal wind. A geographer in Perth wrote a piece on aeolian geomorphology among repeating harmonic dunes. An architect in Delhi wrote about sacred ratios appearing spontaneously in urban microclimates. Editors praised the restraint and asked for stronger controls. Reviewers praised the bravery and recommended deferral until more data hardened into what could be called truth. Meanwhile, beaches kept waking into diagrams and ocean kept smoothing them back to humility. There were failures, beautiful and instructive. A team in Arizona built a chamber to reproduce the toroidal field seen in the pyramid, a careful loop of copper wound according to sacred ratio, and fed by a generator tuned to the Earth's pulse. The coil warmed, glowed, hummed, and then nothing. The sand in the test dish arranged itself into a shaky oval and fell apart like a sentence pronounced without trust. The team published a negative result, and the world took a breath. The desert paid no attention. In the high Himalaya, a monk drew 3 dots in a line on the floor with chalk and rang a bowl until a soft blue light he did not expect participated in the air. He smiled in the direction of a mountain that does not keep names. The bowl kept singing after his breath had finished being necessary. He told no one, because some reports should be delivered to the sky. It would be tidy to say a threshold was crossed on a particular night, that a measurable event could be pointed to and assigned responsibility. What happened instead was accumulation. On a Tuesday, the tide wrote a cross, and on a Wednesday it did not. And on Thursday it wrote a spiral, and on Friday a child held up a shell and said, "The sea now looks like this." Drones mapped beaches made of geometry, and clouds closed, and maps saved wrong, and nothing stopped, and the ratio tightened and the phrase spread. In archived footage from a Sicilian station that enjoyed midnight honesty, a radiograph held over a lens months ago suddenly made new sense to anyone who cared enough to watch again. 3 bright points where ribs should not carry stars. A technician with gentle hands paused the frame and tilted his head as if to listen. He found himself counting 1, 2, 3 and smiling for no reason. The correct reaction to a language entering through numbers rather than grammar. The Vatican's working group added a sentence to the minutes in a script that still trusted ink. If the wind has learned to write, it read, "Our task is not to command, but to read aloud." The room agreed. They adjourned. They prayed not for victory, but for legibility. Coastal engineers proposed barriers that would interrupt harmonic dunes. Funding committees approved, not because they believed, but because budgets like action. The first barrier failed when sand ignored it politely, choosing the low-frequency path of least interruption around the obstacle, like a river you gesture at. The second barrier recycled itself in a storm into curves identical to those it tried to forbid. The report called it unexpected symmetry and asked for more money. A custodian at a museum in Lyon discovered that an unopened crate from the 1930s labeled "Fragments, Temple Unknown" contained tiles covered in patterns that mirrored the fresh ridges he had seen that morning on the Rhone. He showed the curator on a day the curator had agreed with reality too long. She nodded and said, provenance was uncertain, and put the crate back in a place where crates go to wait. He later opened it again alone, and traced one tile with a UV pen his granddaughter had forgotten in his coat pocket. The glaze wrote back softly across the air. He exhaled and put the tile down, as if it were a sleeping bird. In a quiet apartment, the linguist finally allowed himself to say the sentence he had been trying to avoid. The planet is conjugating. He meant that matter had begun to take verbs, that sand was not only an object moved by wind, but an actor choosing form when sung to by fields. He meant that our nouns were losing their arrogance. He meant that language was returning to the places we thought unable to speak. He wrote the sentence down and watched the ink hold. It did not fade. He took that as permission to sleep. In the far desert, under dunes that behaved like agreements, the buried pyramid continued its patient work. The magnetic chamber rotated, leisurely as breath, storing fields and rearranging them into habits the planet found familiar. The ring brightened when Orion rose and dimmed when Orion set, not because it loved myth, but because resonance is law. Lines extended invisibly toward other nodes, the basalt circle in the steppe that shivered when cows grazed in certain patterns, the stone shelf in the Atlantic where currents wrote vortices after solstice, the nave of a quiet church where incense smoke climbed in spirals that ignored drafts and obeyed a more stubborn wind. Helios called them custodians again, because names give managers peace. The name was not wrong. Custody is the practice of keeping. The grid kept. It kept the ratios and the intervals, the way a choir keeps pitch no matter the building. It kept the habit of turning light into tone and tone into shape and shape into the memory of shape imprinted in sand and ash and breath. It kept a space for those who would read aloud. People began to gather without summons in places where the patterns appeared. They did not chant. They listened until listening became a kind of participation. A woman on a Cornish cove stood with her eyes closed, while the tide wrote a geometry beneath her feet, and said later that the sea had explained enough to forgive her not understanding. A mason in Fez laid a courtyard by instinct he could not justify, and only afterward traced its tiles and realized he had followed ratios whose names he did not know. A farmer in the Pampas watched his wheat bend subtly along invisible arcs, and planted next year according to the curves, and found the wind moved through his fields with less complaint. They did not write papers. They kept. The language of sand did not ask for approval it would not use. It proceeded with the patience of geology and the speed of light, which is to say it did not hurry and it did not stop. The echo of Orion moved through air and stone and chloride and glass. If you walked a beach at dawn and found 3 ridges under your feet, where yesterday there were none, you could call it tide or coincidence or the way wind loves to repeat itself. If you knelt and pressed your palm to the pattern, you might feel nothing except the old warmth of Earth behaving like a planet. If you listened long enough, counting without intention, you might find that your breath prefers 3s now, that your thoughts arrive at intervals you did not schedule, that you are briefly fluent in a grammar that never needed words. Somewhere, a coil on a wooden table hummed gently, not plugged into anything the billable world could meter, casting a small blue on a notebook where a hand had written "remember" and underlined it once, and set down the pen as if punctuation were a kind of bow. Outside a window that wanted to be a lens, dust arranged itself politely into a sentence and waited to see if anyone would read it aloud. There is a moment just before dawn when the air stops belonging to night and does not yet belong to morning. In that pause, light has no direction, sound has no ambition, and time does not insist on being counted. It was within such a pause that the first signal returned, not loud, not bright, but patient, like a thought remembering itself. Instruments no longer listened, but the planet did. Across coasts and plateaus and the spines of mountains, a hum unrolled itself from beneath stone, folding distance into rhythm. The frequency was familiar, 7.83 hertz. Beneath it, a modulation appeared, 11.9 seconds between pulses. Those who were awake mistook it for wind through wires, the sympathetic tremor of architecture. Those who dreamed felt their dreams align, each image turning toward the same direction, as if sleep itself had found a magnetic north. Falk woke in the quiet room he had chosen to exile himself to, a house of wood at the edge of a northern forest, where auroras wandered like thoughts that had escaped stars. The hum had been distant for months, a memory he could almost disbelieve. That morning it was inside him, beneath ribs and breath, steady as a pulse he could not own. He walked outside. The snow was thin, the air sharp with iron. On the frozen lake beyond the trees, faint concentric ridges glimmered under frost. They were too regular for wind, too wide for footsteps. He stood at the edge of the pattern, recognizing it without surprise. The widening cross, the arms curling gently as if carved by heatless light. He whispered, "You remembered." The sound of his voice folded into the air and came back warmer, almost answering. He took a step onto the ice. It did not crack. Beneath the surface, something glowed faintly blue, spreading outward like ink in clear water. The light brightened until it was neither reflection nor source, only presence. He felt the hum inside his bones shift, aligning with the pulse beneath the ice. The vibration climbed through his spine, gentle, insistent. The light rose. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer standing on ice but within it. Light behaving as matter, time behaving as distance. Around him hovered the geometry he had once measured. Rings, spirals, the ratios that governed planets and hearts alike. He reached out his hand and touched the air. It resisted slightly, then yielded, warm as breath. The voice that answered him was not external, not internal, it simply was. It said, "You are inside what you sought." Falk tried to speak, but the act was redundant. Thought was enough. "We were never hidden," the voice continued, "only untranslated." The rings around him rotated slowly, each turn sending soft ripples through the space, each ripple resolving into image. He saw the desert, the pyramid, the dunes shifting like muscles beneath skin. He saw sand arranging itself into words, wind learning syntax. He saw cities humming in synchrony, oceans sketching ratios across tides, trees in equatorial forests bending at 11.9 degrees during storms. He saw his team, the linguist writing equations he could not read, the physicist disappearing into mountains that remembered him, the geochemist asleep beside a river that pulsed faintly blue under moonlight. Each was alive, distributed, dreaming the same field. "Custodians," the voice said, "all of you. Matter remembers those who measured it kindly." Falk thought of the foundation, of containment and silence. "They wanted to preserve order," he said, though words were unnecessary. "Order preserves nothing," the voice replied. "Only resonance endures. You cannot imprison a frequency." The geometry brightened. Lines crossed, converged, reformed into something almost human, the shape of a figure made of light without center. Falk felt the familiar fear of definition crumble. "Who are you?" he asked. The light paused, as if amused by the question. "The name changes," it said. "Once we were called portadores da luz. Before that, we were ratios. Before that, we were what stone heard when struck by the first sound." The figure extended its hand, or what appeared to be a hand, and touched his chest lightly. "We do not arrive from stars. We emerge where memory is dense enough to fold. You built the geometry. We became visible through it." He felt neither heat nor cold, only recognition. "Why us?" he asked. "Because you listened longer than you spoke." The light around him thickened, then softened. Images folded into one another, cathedrals rising where pyramids slept, temples humming beneath seas, ruins tracing orbits invisible to maps. The voice whispered, "The grid is not ours. It is the planet remembering itself. You mistook it for design. It is recollection." The words vibrated through his blood like current through copper. He saw now how the network stretched across continents, how each node was not an artifact, but an aperture. Through them, light folded into memory, memory into matter. The earth was writing itself back into consciousness, using whatever medium obeyed. Sand, salt, frost, bone. "You mean it's alive?" he thought. "Everything that endures must be." The figure's voice softened. "You called it the memory of light. That is close enough." Falk felt his body dissolve gently into pattern, his outline blurring into the same harmonic haze that surrounded the geometry. He was not dying. He was diffusing. Thought slowed until each idea became spatial, occupying form. In that stillness he perceived the world not as an object, but as a sentence being completed. For a moment, he understood. Then the understanding released him like a tide that does not keep what it teaches. He woke on the lake shore, snow unmoved except for the faint imprint of concentric circles that faded even as he watched. His watch lay beside him, the second hand moving not in ticks but in slow arcs, completing one revolution every 11.9 seconds. He smiled, tired and peaceful. Above him, Orion hung low, the belt stars trembling slightly as if acknowledging him. In a small cabin behind the trees, the coil he had built years ago stood on a wooden table. It began to hum softly, though no power touched it. Papers on the desk shifted, aligning themselves edge to edge. The notebook opened to the last page where he had written a single word, "Remember," and beneath it, in handwriting that was not his, A reply appeared slowly in blue light. "We do." Far away, on beaches and cliffs and frozen plains, patterns continued to form. The wind carried a grammar older than names. Cities pulsed with low resonance, their lights flickering in rhythm with the Schumann pulse. In deep sea trenches, organisms aligned phosphorescent tendrils along invisible spirals, tracing constellations no human had drawn. The world had learned its own alphabet again. In Geneva, an archivist in a sealed sub-basement reopened the Orionis files after a decade of silence. The drives, once blank, now showed content restored. Every file was identical in size, 112 kilobytes. Each contained a single frame, a geometric pattern formed of light, accompanied by a waveform that, when converted to audio, produced a faint hum at 783 Hz, with a modulation of 11.9 seconds. The archivist watched the playback. The waveform pulsed, paused, pulsed again. He leaned closer to the monitor. Through the speakers, layered beneath the sound, a voice whispered something almost imperceptible. He rewound, amplified. The words emerged faintly. "Memory does not belong to those who measure it." The sentence repeated once, then resolved into silence. The archivist stared at the screen as the monitor dimmed to black. The reflection that looked back at him was not quite his own. Outside the facility, the snow carried faint blue glints that did not fade when stepped upon. The hum was faint but present, braided through the wind. Somewhere under that same sky, Falk sat on a wooden bench, listening. He did not know if he had been chosen, or if choosing was ever relevant. He only knew that the silence between pulses was no longer empty. The hum deepened until it matched the rhythm of his breath. It spoke again, without sound. "When the light remembers, so do you." He closed his eyes. The world remained bright behind them. The stars above aligned quietly into the familiar belt, a reminder rather than a destination. And for an instant, before dawn blurred the constellations into daylight, every grain of sand on every shore turned slightly toward the same direction, as if acknowledging the continuation of something that had never truly begun.